If we're talking about a ransomware event, well, obviously I don't need duplicate equipment and I don't need it to be hosted elsewhere, but I do need to have good backups in place. And then what kind of response are we going to have in the event of that? So we want to make sure that we're cleaning up the malware, figuring out where the source came from, plugging those gaps, and then of course restoring any data that was affected.
What happens to your business if something bad happens? A natural disaster, a major storm, a hardware malfunction, maybe even theft. We don't think it can happen to us, yet unforeseen events like this happen all the time and sadly cripple or destroy companies that don't have a business continuity plan. Joining me to discuss how to create, implement, and test an effective continuity plan is Greg Brainerd. Greg is the CEO of Braintek. It's a prominent managed service provider here in the Houston area. Welcome, Greg.
How you doing, Raj? Thanks for having me.
I'm glad we're talking about this topic because it's something that many people don't always think about because it's not front of mind. It's not something that's happening immediately. Yet having a comprehensive business continuity plan is pretty critical as an emergency preparedness step for Houston area business. Let's talk about that. What are the key things people need to know about business continuity planning?
Well, first off, we need to identify the areas of the business that could potentially go down during a natural disaster and how the company would respond in that particular event. So let's just take a power outage. That happens all the time, depending on what's going on with the weather. It could be very minor, where it's just a few moments, or it, of course, could last for several weeks, depending on the severity of the problem. How would the business operate if it was without power? Well, obviously the internet's going to be offline. If you've got a server at that location, it won't power up. Obviously, people can't work there. So, what would the business do? Now, in a lot of different businesses that could maybe operate remotely, maybe they can just pick up and go to an alternate location. But if it's a manufacturing place, obviously they can't do that. So it's going to be a slightly different in each of those types of scenarios on how you deal with it. If you, for example, own your own building or you're renting your own building, perhaps you could put in a large building battery backup system, something like a Tesla Powerwall. You could also have a generator on standby that comes on in the event that the power is going to be off, and then keep your manufacturing plant going. If you're in a high rise, though, a generator is probably not going to be the answer. So you may want to pick up your staff and go to a different location to continue operating. However, if you've got a server at that location, that's not going to be very viable. So we would have to really sit down and talk about what we want to do in order to make that kind of stuff happen. We had a few years ago, I think this was Hurricane Harvey came by in the Houston area, of course, and hurricanes are very prevalent here. Our business was down for 2 weeks while everything was getting restored. It was a pretty bad event for us. At that time, we had a on-premise phone system which was down. So what we had to do is we had to route phone calls to my cell phone to operate. Our server equipment was offline as well. So what we did is we had handwritten tickets that we would write, and then we would just dispatch out people as necessary. But that's not a great plan in those types of things. So we ended up making choices to make sure that the phone system was going to be up and running. So we went to a cloud phone system that isn't dependent on the Houston area. We moved our servers to a data center that has both redundant power, redundant internet, and is less susceptible to those types of problems from a natural disaster point of view, so that our servers would stay online no matter where we're at in the country. So then at that point, the staff could pick up, go somewhere that has power and internet, and continue to operate normally, or at least as normal as possible.
So you explained quite a few things there. There's seems like there's definitely things to take into account with business continuity, and then also for disaster recovery, because when a hurricane hits, boy, it could wipe out lots of stuff. Could you explain the difference between the two and what companies would need to know?
Yeah, so we start by just planning it out and trying to figure out what's going to be best for your business, and depending on your budget and your scenario and all those types of things, and start answering questions about what could you tolerate in terms of downtime. Is that a week? Is that a day? Is that a couple of hours? And based off of that, then we can start planning to see what's going to happen. So, for example, if we have a disaster with your server, which could be a hurricane, it could be hardware malfunction, and it could be some person that's, maybe a virus, or somebody accidentally just kicks the machine or something. In each of those scenarios, the disaster is different, and you're going to handle it differently in each of those types of responses. So, with the natural disaster, moving the server to an alternate location, having alternative power and internet is going to be a good solution for that. However, that's not going to help me if there's an equipment malfunction. None of that's going to matter for that. So at that point, I want to have other redundancies in place, like a battery backup system, redundant hardware. Maybe it's another piece of server equipment sitting somewhere else that's either ready to go or it's ready to go in just a short amount of time. If we're talking about a ransomware event, well, obviously I don't need duplicate equipment and I don't need it to be hosted elsewhere, but I do need to have good backups in place. And then what kind of response are we going to have in the event of that? So we want to make sure that we're cleaning up the malware, figuring out where the source came from, plugging those gaps, and then of course restoring any data that was affected. So it could be a wide range of different things that we're going to be talking about during the planning session in order to come up with a good solution. And of course, you may want to do all of the different scenarios. So in the event that you're talking about, both hardware malfunctions, disasters in your area, and then of course, ransomware or some kind of human problem. And of course, what's going to be a problem for us in our region of our part of the country, it may not affect everybody in the country. So someone that's in Arizona may not have to worry about hurricanes. It's just not a concern there. So it's just different for every
Right.
business and scenario, and the building scenario that you're in as well.
Now, Braintek provides business continuity consulting and helps companies come up with an IT disaster recovery plan. So, what are the first steps in actually creating such a plan? How would you develop that comprehensive business continuity plan?
So what we do is we sit down with the people that are helping us decide this at the business, and we want to talk to them about the different types of disasters that are out there. Like I mentioned, the hurricane, the ransomware, data theft, hardware malfunction, and we focus in on each of those sections to decide what our reactions are going to be, how we're going to try to prevent it if we can, from being a problem to begin with, and then talk about budgets, because of course I've run into scenarios where people are like, my QuickBooks cannot go down at all ever. And I'm like, okay, well, then that means we have to have servers in different locations across the country. And you're going to be buying, two or three sets of servers. You're going to have to host them in different locations. And then, of course, they tell me, oh, that's going to be too expensive. And I said, okay, well, then we have to back it down and change the solution a little bit. Maybe we talk about having just an offline backup somewhere that can be easily restored in a short amount of time, and maybe that's an acceptable solution. So it really just comes down to the factors that the business wants to be able to afford, what is comfortable from a downtime point of view, and whatnot, and then we can really start honing in on those different solution types that we want to go with. If let's say that the internet goes offline kind of on a semi-regular basis, maybe they've got just spotty coverage where they're at. Well, maybe we can just put in a simple firewall that includes a hotspot, so that when the primary internet goes down, it just flips over to a cell phone connection and just utilizes that. It's not as fast, but it'll keep the business up and running during that outage. And if it's only going to be an hour or so, that might be plenty in that particular scenario. And then we just talk about the prices associated with that. We go back to, if there's a power glitch that happens where it's just minor, well, if I'm using a surge protector, my server just goes offline. Well, then I've got to wait for it to power back up, and that could be, and if it's got to do its updates or anything like that, it could take, anywhere between a few minutes to maybe an hour or two before it comes back online. So having a redundant battery backup system in place is going to be plenty for something like that, where it'll just keep that server up and running during that minor power glitch. So we really have to just talk about all of these different types of events that could happen, what their tolerance is for downtime, what their budgets are, and then we can start formulating those plans with those people.
Now, there's some specific technologies that you use to make sure that people stay in check with this. Could you provide some of those recommendations on what you would deploy?
Yeah, so like what we talked about just a few moments ago was the firewall that has an LTE connection in it. So that helps us in the event that the internet goes offline. We have a power switch. It's a surge protector that's as a smart version of it. And what it does is it can reach out to the internet in a regular interval, let's say every 30 seconds. And if it can't get to the internet after X amount of attempts, it can reboot that power outlet, which is then going to reboot your firewall equipment. And sometimes, that's all it takes is I just need to go over there and reboot my equipment and everything comes back up online. So having a device like this in place will help automatically prevent that problem. Your internet goes down, you're like, and then the equipment does its thing, and all of a sudden your internet's back up, just a few minutes, and then you're back in business. If we're talking about a server redundancy, or either from a hardware malfunction or from a natural disaster that's at that same location, we can have redundant equipment, like maybe a secondary server that's sitting next to the primary server that has an active copy of your data on it that we can spin up very quickly in the event of a problem. Now, of course, there may be other things, like maybe we have internet problems regularly, we have power problems at our office regularly, and we're not in a scenario where we could put in battery backups or generators. Well, then I want to take my server equipment and move it to a data center that's somewhere else, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in the same city that you're in. It could be anywhere in the country, or we can use a cloud service like Microsoft Azure or AWS, and those systems all have a lot of those redundancies built in, where in the event that my server equipment goes offline because of either hardware or a natural disaster, those systems are in place to kind of take over and work. And then the last thing, which gets very expensive, is you can have multiple servers that are mirror copies of each other, and if one goes down, the others kind of pick up in its place and will work. So those are like referred to as clusters. So, and it also is helpful for maintenance. So if I have to, do some updates to one particular server, I can take it offline while the others pick up the load and then continue to operate. And the users that are using it really don't even notice that things are down. So that's the idea.
And one of the other topics that many people look at is just data backup as part of a recovery plan as well. Could you talk to that, like some of the benefits and strategies that you use to deploy a safe data backup plan?
Absolutely. So we encompass a couple of different things. So one, Windows came out with a long time ago, which was the volume shadow copies. And so what that is every time you modify a document that's on your local server, it will then make a copy of it so that I can go restore. But it's sitting on your server. It's not really accessible, but normally, but you can get to it pretty quickly and very easily. And that's before your backup system. But that has a limited amount. So if you've got a whole bunch of people editing the files, you may, let's say that you overwrite some changes that I make onto the file. Well, that could go away very quickly. So then the next part that we have is an actual off-site backup. So that's, of course, in the event that there's some kind of fire, flood, hurricane event, or maybe someone steals your equipment. So the backup is separated away from the equipment. And we want to make sure that in the event of a problem, we can still get to that data if we need to. So we can restore it to another location, to another equipment, or back to the original equipment, depending on what's going on with it. So that's very helpful. The same thing with your mailbox. Did you know that Microsoft does not provide a backup for your actual data in your mailbox? They don't. That's your responsibility to maintain that. Now they maintain backups on the server equipment and making sure that the email system itself works. But as far as your data, that is your responsibility. So if someone were to come into your mailbox and delete it, if you delete it, if just something happens where you lose your laptop and it synchronizes back up to the server, all of those different things that could potentially happen and that mail is gone, or your calendar or your contacts, whichever, the things that are in your mailbox, having a backup in place will allow us to go and restore that data in the event of any of those types of problems as well. So it's very critical to have good backups and a disaster recovery plan in place in the event of any of these types of events.
Now, once you've got the plan in place, you've got to test it to make sure it works. So, business continuity consulting includes creating a test plan. Could you share what you would do to verify that everything actually works as designed?
Absolutely. So oftentimes you've got this backup in place and people want to think that it's a set it up and forget it. So once I've set up my backup, I don't have to do anything. But there's so much more maintenance to it than just that. And let's say that I'm backing up to an external hard drive, but the hard drive is full or the hard drive is off. I'm backing up to a cloud service of some type, and for whatever reason, somebody changed the password a few months back, and nobody's been checking on the backup, and it's been failing because they can't authenticate properly to the backup system. There could be any number of reasons why the backups fail. So first thing is you need to be verifying that the backups are completing properly on a regular basis and addressing any of the error messages that do come up. Next, in order to actually test it, I want to test to verify that I do have my data. So that could be a couple of different ways to test this. So you want to do a fire drill of sorts. So let's say that I'm going to restore my data backup. I can restore a file or a folder that has a whole bunch of files in it and check to make sure that the dates on those files are pretty recent, as of the time of the backup. But that doesn't help me if the server needs to start up on its own. Let's say I try to restore the server and it won't boot. That can happen. So we want to make sure that the server actually will start up. Let's say that you have a database, your QuickBooks or a SQL database or something to that effect. What if that database is damaged or corrupted because of maybe you had some kind of failing equipment that corrupted it? Well, if we're not testing the backups, testing the restores of the backups, well, then when it comes time for me to need that restore and it's broken, well, now there's a lot more downtime and a lot more work involved in trying to recover that data. So it's critical that from time to time, quarterly, monthly, annually, whatever it is that you put in your disaster recovery plan and your continuity plan, that we're doing these checks. So that could simply be restoring the server to an alternate location, not the production environment. And then, someone on staff for that company will log into that server. Hey, does my QuickBooks work? It certainly does. And it has data from, last week or whatever. Oh, yep, all of the files that we saved to the accounting drive are sitting there correctly. Oh, I can get into my ERP properly. The server starts up, and I can do whatever it is that the business needs to do. And yeah, this is a bunch of steps, but making sure that you do this will give you peace of mind and allow you to sleep when these types of events happen.
Craig, this is a really good comprehensive overview about creating that business continuity plan. There are clearly lots of gears, there's lots of things that are in motion. Let's see if we can summarize in a checklist format what a business continuity plan would look like for an executive at a small business. What are the first things they should do at a high level view? Let's create a checklist for them. What would that look like?
Sure. So, the basics that you need to have is you need to have if you've got a server on site, you need to have a battery backup in place. I would highly recommend that server has redundancies built into it, it's like dual power supplies, a RAID array for the hard drives, those types of things. If you're in your own building that you own, I would highly recommend having a generator. It doesn't have to be a super big generator like a whole building one, but something that you can have that maybe powers up the server, along with the refrigerator, and making sure you can charge your cell phone. If your internet is going is spotty, I would recommend having failover internet that works over the entire company, the network as a whole. So I know I could pull my hotspot on my cell phone out and use that, but I want to make sure that the whole network is working. So having a redundant internet. If you're susceptible to these other problems, maybe moving your data equipment from one place to another. So those would be the checklists that I would start with, is having that battery backup in place, making sure the server has fault tolerance built in place, making sure those backups are working and have been working and are restorable. So doing a test on those. And that's going to be for the server, your mailbox, any critical workstations. You know, Raj, another thing that people don't always check, and this could be either, IT professionals or the business in place, but making sure that everything that needs to be backed up is included in the backup. So let's say, for example, you put in a brand new server and the IT person just for whatever reason forgets to put it in the backup. Well, then, of course, when I need to do that restore, there's nothing there for me to restore. Or we install a new application and it's outside of the typical backup scope and it's not included. Well, again, when I need to restore that QuickBooks file and it's no longer in my backups, so that needs to be reviewed also from time to time to make sure that everything is included that you need included in those backups, so that when I do have some kind of disaster, that my plan that I put together and spend time doing will actually work for us in this case.
Greg, this is a great overview of how to get started with a business continuity plan. So that's a service that Braintek provides. What should people do to reach out to you? How can they connect? And what's the first question they should ask you if they want to put a plan like this together?
When they give us a call at 281-367-8253 or visit our website at braintek.com, that's braintek.com. They could just say, hey, we're looking to make sure that we protect our business in the event of some kind of disaster. Now, if they're worried about a specific event like a hurricane or an employee going rogue and deleting data or whatever, then they can, bring up that. But if they're just looking for an overview of all of them, I would just ask for, a disaster recovery business continuity plan.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Greg. Great insights.
Thanks, Raj. You have a great day.